everyone. This video is just going to simply be going over an updated prism that I've made. It's not perfect, but it's very close to perfect. Functionally, the difference between my prism and a perfect prism is essentially just one roll, and even at that, the damage difference won't be that significant. Maybe like 200 or 300 more DPS, maybe a little bit more. But generally speaking, this is basically almost a perfect prism, if not just a perfect prism for my uses. I'm going to show the boss fights, and then after the boss fights, I'm going to be showing a lot of examples between what rings to use, how to kind of play the build. And if you want to watch the boss fight and kind of use that as the example, you can. After the boss fight and the aberrations, I will be talking about potentially using different rings if, for example, you do not have some of these rings. I know everybody doesn't have all of these rings. Some people don't even have the legendary mod that I'm using right now. This build is usable without this legendary mod and other legendary mods. And I kind of go over that and talk about that. You kind of have to do your own testing to see what preferences you like. But here we're going to dive into the boss rush now. Okay, so this test is going to be performed without any prism equipped. I will still have my fragments, of course. So this is essentially how it should perform if you had literally no prism with the gear at hand. And for the rotation, you really want to focus, what you really want to focus on is looking at that mod in your secondary and knowing how many times you have to press the button. With this, it's a little bit more easier. When we get to the legendary perk, it'll be a little more complicated. Whenever you're swapping, pay attention to how many charges you have, but your attention should always be focusing on the bottom right corner, looking at when that mod has a number. So if it has one skewer, you swap to it, shoot once. Sometimes it'll have two, depending on your mod generation, if you are using different rings, which I'll go over soon. But essentially on the high end of this, you should be reaching 5.5k DPS roughly on the highest end. It does take time for this to build up, especially if you don't have the legendary effect, simply because you cannot activate two Starfalls simultaneously. So you need to do a really good rotation to get those Starfalls out, because you can have two active at a time. So here I'm going to show you with my perfectly rolled prism. So I have mod damage and mod power generation, as you can see, also explosive damage and crit damage. Those are the big things. You really don't need like skill cooldown. I'm just using that simply for like better survivability. Same with the health. and health regeneration. Skill, you don't really know this. You really don't need the skill cooldown. I just use it because of whatever, right? It was just something that paired well with health generation. Having any type of defensive, using health bonus. You can even change out your relics if you want to. You can use flat health bonus, a percentage health bonus, armor, flat armor, and even damage percent reduction if you want as well. There's really nothing else that you'd really want to use in this tree for relics. I suppose you could use health regeneration. So if you're using a trait that increases your health regeneration, the healing trait with medic, then it can be good. Explosive damage will only apply to your starfall. But keep that in mind. It does not increase the damage of your skewer. So if you want to change out your relic instead of using explosive damage, you totally can do that. And as you can see here, I have the ring that gives me armor and health. I'm just using this because it's usually generally the best ring you can use. You can totally swap this out for another ring. But here I'm going to show you with 10% more crit instead of my defensive ring, just to see how much DPS I can get. So on the high end, probably going to reach like 7.5 if you have that perfect rotation. And as for perfect rotation, as you can see, I'm using 2 arrow storms as I shoot them, and I can swap back. Sometimes I'll decide to not use them or not, depending on if the arrow storm is up already, or the starfall as it's called. I'll probably be calling arrow storm on occasion. But it's always good to shoot both of your starfalls, swap, and then use the remainder of that mod. As you just see, I just got like 1 skewer back while I was shooting those 3 skewers. As long as you have those starfalls up and are keeping them up 24/7, you're usually pretty good on your rotation. You're not going to be missing too much DPS. There is like a perfect rotation where skewer is going to be giving you the most damage, so you're trying to just get as many skewer charges as possible. That is what's going to be climbing your DPS, as long as you have those starfalls up. As you can see, I can reach about like, what was that, 7.6k DPS just for changing out to crit ring. I am going to be going over other rings that you could use alternatively. And as again for the rotation, what you really want to be doing, and I'm going to go over certain rings where it might change how your rotation is for swapping items. But generally speaking, it's 2 starfall shots. And then if you look in the bottom right, you can see what your secondary has, how many charges it has. Whenever you swap, just keep that number in mind. So it's like, okay, I see 2 or 3 or 4 here. Whenever I swap to it, I'm going to shoot that many times and then swap back to starfall, shoot 2 starfall charges. Generally speaking, that's what you're going to want to do. The crit chance is definitely a big bump in damage. I'm going to be testing with explosive damage. This will only apply to your starfall. So it's not going to be too much of an increase in damage, but it's something you can consider that just with, like, let's say you don't have all these rings. Not everybody's going to have a ring if you're starting out. Using an explosive damage ring can definitely help you out. And as you can see here, the skewer is really what bursts that damage. That's the big bursts of damage that you're going to see. And here with the full rotation with explosive damage, 15%, we'll kind of compare it to the 10% crit. If you really want to simplify the idea of what you should be doing for this rotation, it's really just as simple as swap to the item, use all the charges, swap to the other item, use all the charges. That's really all you're really doing. There can be other interactions where you might need to change that rotation. Maybe you're not getting as much mod generation. There might be circumstances in which you are unable to perfectly do that type of rotation, maybe because you're not hitting a target, or the target moves out of the damage of your starfall, so you're not generating as much mod power as you could be, so that might even change your rotation. But generally speaking, if you're just damaging a target straight up, this is absolutely fine and acceptable. This 15% damage might be actually more, be doing more damage simply because my rotation is slightly better, but generally speaking, it's pretty close to the same amount of damage that I've been doing with that crit ring. So a 15% damage explosion on my mod for starfall versus 10% crit. You can notice it's kind of around the same DPS increase. It's a little bit more consistent than the crit, because crit is a variable, so it's not happening all the time, so it can fluctuate in terms of DPS. And here we're going to test 12% mod damage. This is 12% mod damage. I said optimally, if you had the prism with the an extra 7.5% mod crit, this would be the most damage you could ever do. That's the only thing I don't have rolled on my prism, but as you can see, like, overall the mod damage is going to be the most increase in DPS, as well as the best burst in DPS, as it's consistent throughout. It's just a flat damage, everything is increased, whereas crit chance is going to be, things will be increased periodically, whereas when you look at the 15% explosive damage, it'll be increased, but only half of your mod damage will be increased for that 15%. And as you can clearly see, mod damage is definitely increasing my DPS very significantly. I believe without this ring at all, which is usually what I run like a defensive ring, I'm basically increasing my DPS by like 1,000. So it wouldn't surprise me if I increased my DPS with a perfectly rolled prism with that mod crit. It would probably even be increasing like 200 or 300 more DPS on this. It's not exactly necessary, because you are just doing so much DPS, it doesn't really matter. But as you can see, I'm reaching, what, 8k, maybe probably 7.9k DPS on the low end, if I mess up on rotation, and then like 8.1, 8.2k DPS on the high end, if I'm doing perfect. There is one more thing that you can consider. With mod generation, you can use your skill and it'll passively grant you mod generation. Therefore, your charges might be back sooner. So whenever you're swapping to skewer, because usually getting starfall charges isn't difficult, because you're just generating so much mod power for that. Okay, for this one, I'm going to be showing you Burden of the Follower to see how mod generation can kind of change how many charges you're getting. And as you see, I just hit the target with those 3, and because I had bonus mod generation, I'm actually able to shoot a few more times. So if you have 3 charges potentially, you might be shooting 4 times in a row. You'll have to get used to that, and sometimes it can be a variable. But as you can see, it'll be a DPS increase, generally speaking, simply because you are being able to use those mods a few more times. As I said, you just be using this if you want to have a bit smoother interaction with killing mobs. Most of the time on bosses, your mod generation isn't that bad, as you can kind of see, especially if you have the legendary mod. If you don't have the legendary mod, you might not even need this bonus mod generation if you have enough. Generally speaking, there's probably better rings than this mod generation thing, unless you're not using the amulet that I was talking about that I'm using right now. This is usually what I run, is increasing my defensive ability, because you do enough damage. Even if you were to take off the majority of like these relics, you could totally swap it out for other defensives. As I said, explosive damage, you could even, as I said, with this you can even go a little bit more mod generation if you feel like you are lacking mod generation. Mod skill and cast speed doesn't really do much. I'm going to show this off, as you can kind of see, like, it doesn't really change how fast you're shooting them off. It does, but it's at such a minor level of increase of shooting power. It just doesn't help enough. If you want to try using cast speed, you can totally do that. This guy always loves to watch while I test. He's always in the way too. This is his favorite spot apparently, but this is my spot. Yeah, get out of here. So I'm going to be testing with 10% more bonus mod generation with my usual defensive ring, health, and armor, just for that bonus defensive. So instead of having 10% more damage on my explosive damage, I'm going to be taking 10% more mod generation. And it'll slightly increase your generation for your skewer primarily, as most of the time you never have an issue generating mod power or starfall. As you can see, I always shoot 2 charges of starfall, and then I come back to skewer, and I usually have 2 or 3 skewers available. And sometimes I'll have 3, sometimes I'll have 2 skewers for mod generation. As you can see, with -1 ring and minus 10% explosive damage, you'll see that I'm reaching, still around 7k on the high end, maybe like, 7.3 to 7.4k DPS if I have a good rotation. And even if you mess up here, like I'll even shoot a couple arrows, your DPS still hangs on strong, simply because of that starfall. And your burst comes so quickly from skewer that you're not going to be losing too much DPS, even if you do mess up. This is probably one of the best defensive rings, simply because it has health, which I value the most in terms of defensive ability, especially when you have a lot of armor already that gives you damage reduction. You already have a lot of damage reduction. Health is the best way to scale that survivability up. You can really, you really don't need to use this 10% explosive damage. It will help your DPS for Starfall, but you can totally swap it out for something else like health. As I said, explosive damage only affects Starfall, so you will be losing damage, but it's not necessary to really, you're not going to be losing too much damage for it, especially if you feel like you're dying too often and you just want a little bit more survivability. And if you feel like your survivability isn't high enough, like you have 57.5 right now. So with just changing my ring, I'm going to get a lot more survivability and a lot more health, right? And that's really going to help with me not dying or getting one shot, or if you're in a situation where you're getting hit multiple times, this can definitely help out, especially when you have fortified to increase your value. You can spend points, or you can change your relic to bonus health and bonus armor percentage because you have such a high base value. Flat armor or flat health is really good. It's kind of hard to go wrong with either of them, but percentage is usually going to get, you know, more value overall, just because you'll usually have a little bit of health or a little bit more armor than usual. So, and as you can see, like the difference between the armor value isn't too big with the damage reduction. You'll notice I only actually get 2% more damage reduction from a 5% thing. So getting that armor bonus percentage is more valuable, and same with that flat armor. You're going to probably have more damage reduction. But realistic, if you want more damage, these are the ones you should probably be using. If you feel like you want to swap something out, you can totally do that. I probably would recommend explosive damage for that mod crit if you are using more mod crit, or if you're using more crit based items. Explosive damage is definitely going to be for your Starfall primarily, as I said. And you do have a good amount of damage reduction here, as you can kind of see. You're only getting like 2% more when you swap out this ring. And if you feel like you want to have like a better dodge, maybe your defense is fine, and the only issue that you're kind of coming across is not being able to dodge enough, dodge as frequently, or dodge as often. Or perhaps you're running out of stamina. Maybe you're like pre-dodging, so you run out of stamina. If you look at me, I'm trying to make sure I'm in the heavy weight class so I can actually roll, right? Let's say, for example, I'm flopping. If you flop, then you're really going to have a big problem. If you want to use that dodge ring, then you can totally do that to mitigate taking damage, and so you can just dodge more frequently with less stamina. Here I'm going to be using the health regeneration ring, encrypted ring. It is really good. It's kind of hard to go wrong with this ring. It is simply just a really good ring. It is based off of your health total, so you have to keep that into consideration. So the more health total you have, the more regeneration you'll be healing, as it's based on your percentage health and not your base health. It's based on your maximum health. So if you have more health, you'll be able to take more. You'll be able to heal more if you have more health. So as you use mods, you're basically always going to have up to 30 seconds as it stacks up the more you use it. It's pretty hard to go wrong with this ring if you feel like if you're going to get bursted down, then this ring isn't going to help you that much. But if you're going to be taking a little bit damage here and there, then this is totally an acceptable ring. Generally speaking, you will be healing most of the time, but this will allow you to get passive health regeneration outside of combat and or outside of times where you can't damage your target. So if you can't damage the boss, you won't be able to leech, especially if you're using the life leech heart. Honestly, you can put any type of damage bonus ring here. It just depends on what you have. If you have the crit ring, if you have the health generation ring, it really just depends on your individual needs. I usually like to have a defensive just because I like to play this game and not have to worry about anything. I don't have to be like, oh, I got to be careful because I got to dodge this or play a certain way. It gives me a little bit more freedom if I'm able to take a little bit more damage. You could even use something like this where it gives you health regeneration whenever you're hit. It's just a nice way to minimize the damage you're taking. Or any type of flat damage, any type of flat health is also going to be helpful if you don't have a certain ring. You can usually never go wrong with flat health. Most of the time, if you have a high armor, which you are likely going to have with this, if you are wearing a full set of Lidos, or a partial set, then having that flat health is always going to be a big benefit. And as you can see with flat damage reduction, you don't really get as much damage reduction the more damage reduction you have. So for instance, I'm only getting a few percent damage reduction. I'm actually getting the full value of 5%. I believe if your armor value is lower or your damage reduction is lower, flat damage reduction will be higher. It'll be more effective. But essentially if you have, say, let's say you have 5 or 6 bulwark on, it'll go up to, what is it, 27%, but you'll only probably be getting 20% of that damage reduction of value as like, so you won't be getting that full 27%. So it's important to know that health is something that scales really well if you have a lot of health, especially if you have that ring that will generate health over time. You'll be getting more value out of that because you'll have more health percentage as your max health will be higher. Encrypted ring is going to be a very good ring, and obviously you can never go wrong with a Black Cat band. It's definitely one of the best rings in the game, as it just is such a nice safety net. I generally speaking always like the Ring of the Robust, simply because it gives you armor and health. Hard to go wrong with both of those. A little bit more damage reduction with some more health. You can prep the boss fight by shooting skewers and starfalls, and you can kind of see like the generation I'm getting. I'm basically getting like 1 starfall and 1 skewer. There will be a time where it'll fall off, where I won't be able to get it, technically speaking, on occasion, but most of the time you're always going to have that 1 skewer and 1 starfall going. And you can just rotate back and forth to make sure those are all prepped up. So whenever a boss or a big monster comes in, you're basically going to be able to one-shot everything unless it's a boss. And even sometimes if it is a boss, you'll be able to one-shot them because it just does so much damage. And as you can also see with Archon, I'm generating mod power every time I cast a mod. So that passive mod generation is that passive mod power is helping me with that as well, smoothing out that swapping between the mods. And I have 10% mod generation here. So, and then 20% mod generation for my core trait. And then I also have the 10 mod power per second as well. Great. If you want to swap out these points for something else, a lot of people don't have life steal efficacy. If you want, you can totally swap out Leech and Siphoner if you want more health generation and or just flat health. You'll notice that there's an increased radius for my Starfall. And what's interesting here, as you'll kind of see, as long as it's inside the radius of the black hole that's summoning all the bolts, it'll actually hit the target. And sometimes it can be slightly out of the radius and it'll still be damaging them. So right here you can actually see them, you can actually see the target dummy still getting hit, even though he's outside of the range of the radius. Sometimes when you're fighting enemies, it's going to be a lot easier when you have that double mod legendary. So usually what you would want to do is, if you're shooting at a target from a distance and you hit the target, most of the time they're going to die. But what you would really want to do, actually more importantly, is let them come to you, like go around a corner and be inside the radius of these things. So you got to prep up and kind of like make a trap so that when they come to you, they're going to be taking a ton of damage. So for example, let's say this guy's an enemy. He's probably, depending on how quick he is and how fast he is, he's probably going to get to me quickly depending on his health. Let's say it's an aberration, for example. He might just walk straight through it and take very little damage. Maybe because you shoot or miss or whatever the issue is. But he's only going to be taking damage for a little bit. So the best thing to do usually is kind of create like a trap and make it so when they approach you, then you can burst them down really easily and you're kind of safe in that manner. Also, if you are hit in this time period, you feel like you can't, if you feel like you're going to get hit, you can totally drop this and this can be just a death trap and you'll have more defense and damage reduction here. So this is going to be the best chance whenever you are doing boss rush, is simply run to the last portal, quickly find the bonus, quickly find the perk if you can, but then just run to the door straight away, and then you're just going to kind of like hunker up. You can use summons. The majority of the time they always get in the way and they just become really annoying. The damage that they're doing isn't significant enough to really warrant summoning them, especially when they lower your damage, simply because they're always in the way. I usually just swap to this big guy and I'll summon him occasionally. Most of the time he ends up dying just from friendly fire. And as I said, he's usually not doing enough damage to really matter. You can use him, technically speaking, for health regeneration out of combat, or if you're not in a place to damage a target, heal yourself, or you don't have something to heal yourself. This can be an alternative way to heal yourself. As you can see, when you summon and sacrifice him, he will give you some health, passive health regeneration, and it lasts for quite a bit of time, so you can heal up to full. With the minion flyers, I've noticed something very different. You'll notice that, so the Reaver sacrifices 35% health, the Flyers sacrifice 10% health, and then the original summons, the first summons you get, sacrifice 15%. So with the Flyers, they'll actually give you percentage health regeneration, which is very interesting. It actually doesn't say here that it's going to give you a different type of healing, which is very interesting. So Reaver will give you flat health regeneration, whereas these Flyers will actually give you percentage health regeneration, which is really interesting and something I've never really noticed before. And here, these ones don't last as long. They will give you that health regeneration and increased healing. So if you do have more passive health regeneration, this could actually boost your health regeneration up by a significant amount. But as I said, they don't last very long. But then again, you can summon them so frequently because they're on a shorter cooldown and they will cost less to summon compared to the Reaver. So you can have that constant health regeneration, a little bit more consistent if you feel like it. And yeah, having that 1%, like for me, on my roll on my prism, I have health regeneration, and I'm also using the trait. And if I had triage, this would help dramatically with my health regeneration, as 50% of the value that I have currently for health regeneration will be added. And as you can see, I have bonus mod generation and life healing efficacy. If I could, I would try to have health increased healing effectiveness with vigor. I'm using strong back simply because it essentially is a damage reduction bonus, because it's like wearing lighter armor for less weight. It allows me to roll, so it's essentially like a survival trait. So it essentially decreases your increases your defensiveness, so you don't have to do that flop. You can use Profane Heart for that health regeneration, but if you feel like using a different heart, like let's say you don't have, because like I have 6% right now total with this, another 3%, which is a total of 6%. I have 3% here and 3% here, which is a total of 6%. But you can also just use the Tranquil Heart for that 2 passive life regeneration, and then any values that you're going to get from that bonus healing effectiveness from medic trait will actually be multiplied, which is really nice if you want to just not worry about it. You can definitely be bursted down a lot sooner if you do have less life regeneration, but most of the time, and you can have a combination of the two, but having Tranquil Heart, Triage, and Regrowth, plus anything you might have on your ring slot and or your relic and or trait for that health regeneration, it could really be a helpful amount of health regeneration, and you really wouldn't have to worry about hitting any target. You just always have that passive health regeneration. Lifesteal efficacy is definitely going to be really good when you're fighting bosses and they're bursting you down, because you'll be able to heal up so quickly. It just kind of depends on your playstyle. Going with a little bit of both is absolutely acceptable if you want. All right, that's it for the video. I actually had to re-record this, so this was super annoying. That's it for today. Like the video and subscribe. Hopefully you guys appreciate this. If you guys want any builds to be broken down more, simply comment and let me know. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. And as I said, have a good day, and like and subscribe.